The sun was a hard white coin in the big Wyoming sky, beating down on the gray rock ranch. For Elias Kane, a man whose face was as lined and tough as the leather of his old saddle, this heat was just another thing to work through. But the problem waiting for him back at the main barn wasn't about dry grass or thirsty cattle. It was a four-legged storm in the shape of a dog. They called him Rogue. He was a blue heeler pup, born to the best herding dog Elias had ever owned. Everyone expected great things from him. But a terrible thing happened when Rogue was just a few weeks old. A coyote got into the pen at night. By the time Elias heard the noise and came running with his rifle, it was too late for the rest of the litter. Only Rogue survived, hiding and shaking in a corner. From that night on, something in him changed. It was like the fear and the wildness of that attack stayed inside him, turning into a sharp kind of anger. Now, at 6 months old, Rogue was a beautiful dog, a mix of blue-gray and black fur with intelligent, watchful eyes. But he was useless on the ranch. Worse than useless, he was a danger. He wouldn't listen to commands. Instead of herding the cattle, he chased them, nipping at their heels in a frantic, scared way that made them panic and run. He'd chewed through 2 expensive bridles and a saddle strap. He'd growled at the ranch hands, and once, he'd even snapped at Elias himself when the man tried to put a rope on him. That was the final straw for Elias. He had no room on a working ranch for an animal that couldn't work and couldn't be trusted. He saw the scared, angry pup not as a victim of that coyote attack, but as a broken thing. A dog whose spirit had been cracked, letting all the bad stuff in and leaving no space for the good. He built a strong, separate kennel for Rogue, far away from the other dogs and the main house. It felt like a jail, and Rogue paced it like a prisoner, barking at everything that moved. One afternoon, after Rogue had caused a young calf to bolt and nearly get hurt, Elias drove into town for supplies. His mood was as black as thunderclouds. At the old feed store, leaning against the wooden counter among bags of grain, the other ranchers asked about the pup. They'd heard stories. "That heeler of yours causing trouble again, Elias?" asked one man, a friend with a spread north of the river. Elias let out a long, tired breath. Trouble's his middle name. Dog's got a heart made of thorn bush. All prickles, no softness. I've tried everything I know. He's smart, but he's turned all that smartness into being mean. Another rancher, younger, suggested a firm hand. Maybe he just needs a good, strong lesson. A real show of who's boss. Elias shook his head. He'd tried that too. It only made Rogue fight harder. In that moment, feeling frustrated and sure of himself, Elias made a declaration. His voice was loud and clear in the quiet store. "I'll tell you what. I'm done wasting time. That dog's untamable. His wiring's all crossed from that night. I'll bet a month's worth of mending on any man's fence line that no one can get through to him. No one can turn that Rogue into a ranch dog." A month of fence mending was serious business. It meant long, back-breaking days of repairing miles of wire. It was a bet that said Elias was absolutely 100% certain. The men in the store looked at each other, some smiling, some shaking their heads. They all knew Elias was a stubborn man who kept his word. They also knew that wild little dog. No one took the bet right then, but the word spread. The story of the rancher and his untamable pup became a little local legend. Back at Gray Rock, Rogue, alone in his kennel, felt the world as a terrifying, loud place. Every sudden noise was the coyote coming back. Every person was a threat. The memory of that night was a dark shadow he couldn't outrun. He barked and snarled, not because he was evil, but because he was so scared, and fear had only one language he knew: attack. He'd look at Elias and the other hands, see their frustration, their stern faces, And it just confirmed his belief. The world was against him. He became a ghost on his own ranch. The cowhands would see a blue-gray blur darting behind the tractor, or hear a lonely, furious bark echo from the far kennel at dusk. They gave him a wide berth. The bet Elias made wasn't just about fencing. It was a funeral for the dog's future. Everyone, including Elias, had given up on him. Rogue was a problem waiting for a solution that no one could find. He was a story of what could have been, left to pace in the dust, all alone under the huge, uncaring sky. The stage was set, but it seemed like the play was already over. No one knew that the person who would change everything was just about to arrive. Not with a rope or a command, but with a quiet voice and a simple, patient heart. The old pickup truck kicked up a long trail of dust as it came down the ranch road. Inside, sitting straight and quiet, was a little girl. She was 8 years old, with hair the color of wheat and eyes that noticed small things. A butterfly on the fence post, the way the clouds piled up over the mountains. This was Elias's niece. She came to the gray rock every summer, and for her, it was the best part of the year. But this summer felt different the moment she stepped out of the truck. The air was quiet in a way that felt empty. Usually, she would hear the happy jingle of a collar, the soft thump-thump of a tail wagging against the porch steps. Her old friend, the gentle collie who used to follow her everywhere, was gone. Elias had told her on the phone, but hearing it and feeling the silence were two different things. A little hollow space opened up inside her. She gave her uncle a small hug. He patted her back, his big hand gentle. "Place hasn't been the same without you," he said, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She could tell he was worried about something. The first day was filled with the usual things: unpacking her small bag, helping her aunt in the kitchen, watching the horses in the far field. But the quiet followed her. She kept listening for the sound that wasn't there. It was on the second morning that she saw the ghost. She was sitting on the porch step, drawing in a notebook, when a movement caught her eye. Way over by the old equipment shed, a dog shot across the open space like a blue-gray arrow. It didn't run like the happy ranch dogs. This run was all panic and purpose, as if something was chasing it, or it was chasing something only it could see. Then it disappeared behind the shed. A moment later, from the direction of a lonely-looking kennel, she heard a single, sharp bark. It wasn't a friendly hello bark. It sounded angry and sad, all mixed together. "Uncle Eli?" she asked later, while they were shelling peas on the porch. "Who is the dog way over by the shed?" "The blue one?" Elias's hand stilled. He let out a sigh that seemed to come from his boots. "That's not a dog, sweetheart. That's a problem. His name's Rogue, and he's not right in the head. He's dangerous. You are not to go near that kennel. You hear me? Not for any reason. He'd just as soon bite you as look at you." She nodded, because that's what you did when your uncle used that voice. But inside, she was curious. The grown-ups had given the dog a name that meant a troublemaker. But the bark she heard didn't sound like a troublemaker. It sounded like a scared creature. Over the next 2 days, she watched. She had a good spot from her bedroom window. She saw her uncle or the ranch hands approach the kennel with a food bowl. The dog would back into the farthest corner, lips curled, a low growl rumbling in his chest. They'd leave the bowl and walk away quickly, shaking their heads. She saw the dog pace, back and forth, like he was wearing a path in the dirt with his worry. One afternoon, she decided to do a little experiment. She didn't go near the kennel, not even close. Instead, she took her favorite book, a big, thick story about a secret garden, and she walked to a spot about as far away as her school's swing set. There was a flat rock under a scrubby tree. She sat down. She could see the dog clearly. He saw her too. He stopped pacing and stood stiff, staring at her. She ignored him. Not in a mean way, but in a busy way. She opened her book and started to read out loud. Her voice was soft and a little halting on the big words. She read about a lonely little girl finding a hidden, forgotten place. The dog in the kennel erupted. He barked and barked, a sharp, surprised sound. He ran to the side of the fence closest to her and snarled, showing his teeth. Her heart jumped a little. But she didn't look up. She didn't yell, shush, or throw a rock. She just took a slow breath, turned the page, and kept reading. She made her voice a steady, gentle stream of words in the hot, quiet afternoon. She read a whole chapter. The dog barked for a long time, then his barks became more of a frustrated woof. Then they stopped. When she finally glanced up, he was sitting. Not calmly, but sitting. His head was tilted. He was just listening. The next day, she did it again. This time, she sat a few steps closer. She had part of a biscuit from breakfast in her pocket. She didn't try to hand it to him. She knew better than to put her fingers near that fence. Instead, when she got up to leave, she placed the piece of biscuit carefully on top of a fence post near her rock. Then she walked back to the house, not looking back. The morning after that, the biscuit was gone. A routine began. Every day after her morning chores, she would go to her spot. Sometimes it was a little closer to the kennel. She would talk. Not baby talk, not commands. She just talked. "It's hot today," she'd say. "That cloud looks like a sheep. Auntie is making apple pie later." She was just a small, calm voice in the big silence of his world. One day, she didn't talk. She sang. It was a simple, silly song her mother used to sing when she was little, about a duck and a puddle. Her voice wavered and wasn't very good, but she sang it all the way through. The dog, for the first time, lay down. He put his head on his paws, his eyes never leaving her. The tight, angry line of his body seemed to loosen, just a little. From the shadow of the barn, Elias watched this whole thing. He saw his niece, small and fearless in her own quiet way, doing what none of his strength or experience could do. She wasn't trying to tame the storm. She was just sitting quietly in the rain, waiting for it to pass. And for the first time since he'd made that bet in the feed store, a doubt crept into his mind. It was a small, quiet feeling, like the first drop of rain before a shower. He crossed his arms and leaned against the rough wood, watching, wondering what in the world was going to happen next. The new routine on the ranch became as steady as the sunrise. Every morning, after helping her aunt wipe the breakfast dishes, the girl would walk across the yard. She didn't hurry. Her steps were slow and deliberate, a small figure moving through the tall, golden grass. She carried a world in her pockets, sometimes a shiny rock, sometimes a piece of string, always a little bit of something saved from her breakfast, a crust of toast. A corner of a pancake got the dog in the kennel. The one they called Rogue began to wait for her. He no longer paced frantically when he saw her coming. Instead, he would stand at the front of his pen, his body still tense, but his ears were forward, listening. The angry, warning barks had softened into a single, uncertain woof of greeting. It was a huge change, but it was a fragile one. The girl understood this without being told. She never pushed too far. Too fast. She would settle into her spot for the day, which was now just a few arms' lengths from the kennel fence. She'd sit cross-legged in the dirt, and she'd just exist. Some days she'd read from her book. Other days she'd tell him about the dream she had, or describe the funny-looking chicken in the coop. She spoke in a soft, meandering stream, never demanding a response. She was teaching him a new language, the language of a calm and patient presence. One day, she brought a length of soft, old rope she'd found in the barn. She didn't try to play tug-of-war. She simply sat, looping it into clumsy knots, and then untangling them, talking quietly about nothing in particular. The dog watched, fascinated, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Another time, she carefully rolled a bright red apple from her lunch toward the fence. It stopped a good foot short. He stared at it for a long time then. When a cloud passed over the sun, he darted forward, snatched it, and dashed back to his shelter to crunch it loudly. Trust, she was learning, was built in these tiny, silent moments. It was in the not reaching, the not grabbing, the not shouting. Then, one afternoon, the sky changed. It had been hot and still, but now the mountains to the west seemed to swallow up the sun early. A thick, purple bank of clouds rolled in, and the air grew heavy and cool. A low grumble of thunder echoed in the distance. The girl saw the change in the dog instantly. It was like a switch had been flipped. The little bit of calm he had gathered over the weeks vanished. His eyes went wide and white-rimmed. He began to pant, his sides heaving. A high, scared whine leaked from his throat. The thunder boomed again, closer this time, and he exploded into movement. He ran from one end of his kennel to the other, crashing into the walls, scrambling in the dirt. He was trapped, and his oldest, deepest fear was coming for him from the sky. The girl's first instinct was to run to the house. That's what her uncle had told her to do if there was trouble. But seeing the pure terror in the animal, a mirror of the loneliness she'd felt when she first arrived, rooted her to the spot. The first cold raindrop hit her nose. Instead of running away, she did something simple. She turned her back to the kennel. She didn't look at his panic, because sometimes being watched makes fear worse. She sat down right there in the dirt, pulled her knees to her chest, and wrapped her arms around them. The storm broke. Rain fell in a sudden, hard sheet. Lightning flashed, and a crack of thunder seemed to split the sky right above the ranch. The dog yelped, a sharp, painful sound. The girl started to sing. It was the same silly, off-key song about the duck and the puddle she'd sung before. Her voice shook, partly from the cold rain soaking her shirt, partly from the loudness of the storm. But she kept singing. She sang it over and over, a small, shaky tune against the roar of the wind and the boom of the thunder. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just scared too, and this was the only thing she knew to do. She was saying with her song, I am here. I am scared with you. We are both here in this noisy, wet mess. Minutes passed that felt like hours. The rain soaked her to the skin. Her teeth began to chatter. But she didn't stop her quiet singing. Slowly, a change happened. The frantic scrambling in the kennel lessened. The whines softened. She didn't turn to look, not yet. She just kept her back to him, a small, wet rock in the storm. When the worst of the thunder had rumbled off toward the east, leaving behind a steady, calming rain, she finally fell silent. She was so cold. She hugged herself tighter. Then she heard it. A soft, wet snuffling sound. Very close. She held her breath. Slowly, so slowly, she turned her head. There he was. The dog was pressed against the chain-link fence, as close to her as he could possibly get. His fur was plastered down by the rain, making him look smaller. He wasn't growling. He wasn't barking. He was just shivering, his nose poked through one of the links, sniffing gently at the air near her shoulder. His brown eyes looked into hers, and for the first time, she didn't see anger or fear. She saw a question. She saw a shared feeling. She didn't move a muscle. She just let him look, let him sniff. A connection, thin as a spider silk and just as strong, hung between them in the quiet rain. From the shelter of the open barn door, her uncle had watched the whole thing. He'd seen the storm roll in and had been about to shout for her to run to the house when he saw her sit down. He watched, his heart in his throat, as his small niece faced the storm and the terrified animal. He saw her turn her back, heard the faint, trembling thread of her song carried on the wind. He saw the dog finally calm, drawn to her quiet strength. Elias stood very still, the rain misting the air in front of him. The hard, sure belief he'd carried that the dog was broken, that the bet was a sure thing, began to crack and soften, like dry earth under the gentle, soaking rain. He realized something he had been too stubborn to see. The problem wasn't that the dog's spirit was broken. The problem was that everyone, including himself, had been trying to shout at a creature that only understood a whisper. The morning after the storm, the air on the ranch felt fresh and new, as if the whole world had been washed clean. But for Elias, the feeling was more complicated. He'd spent a sleepless night thinking. He had seen something impossible with his own eyes. That wild, snarling creature had pressed itself against a fence to be near a little girl singing in the rain. It didn't make any sense to his practical, rancher's mind. He found his niece on the porch after breakfast, feeding bits of scrambled egg to a barn cat. "What you did yesterday," he began, his voice gravelly. "That was brave." She just shrugged, a small smile on her face. "He was scared." "I know he was," Elias said, sitting down heavily on the step beside her. "But I made a promise, you understand. A bet with the men in town. I said no one could turn that dog into a ranch dog." He rubbed his jaw, the stubble making a scratchy sound. "Seeing him calm is one thing, but a ranch dog has a job. It has to listen. It has to work with a person, not just sit near them." The girl looked at her uncle, her eyes clear. "He listens to me." Elias let out a long breath. He wanted to believe it, but a lifetime of experience with animals argued against it. Maybe the dog was just clever, pretending to be calm to get treats. Maybe it was a trick. He needed to know for sure. He needed a test. "All right," he said, a plan forming in his mind. "There's a simple job. The heifer with the white face, number 17, and her new calf. They're in the south pasture. I need them brought into the smaller pen by the barn for a checkup. It's an easy walk, no hills, no other cattle to mix them up with." He paused, watching her face. "You think he's ready? You think you and him can bring them in?" Her eyes got a little wider, but she nodded. A serious little dip of her chin. Word of the test spread among the ranch hands faster than a grass fire. The bet Elias had made in the feed store was local legend. By mid-morning, when the sun was warm but not yet harsh, a small group had gathered near the barn. A couple of the ranchers from neighboring spreads had even heard the news and driven over. They stood with Elias, their hats pulled low, arms crossed. No one was smiling. It wasn't a party. It felt more like people gathering to see if a tiny sailboat could weather a big wave. The girl felt their eyes on her. Her stomach was full of fluttering moths. She walked across the yard, not toward the men, but toward the kennel. The dog saw her coming. His tail gave one slow, uncertain wag, then stopped. He could feel the tension in the air, too. She didn't give a big speech. She just unlatched the gate and opened it wide. For a long moment, nothing happened. The dog stood frozen inside the kennel, looking past her at the crowd of men. A low rumble started in his chest. The men shifted their feet, murmuring. The girl didn't look back at them. She simply turned and started walking toward the south pasture, leaving the kennel gate open behind her. She didn't call the dog. She didn't whistle. She just trusted Dot. There was a scrambling sound in the dirt. Then a soft pattering of paws. The dog trotted out, his head low, his body slinking. He didn't run off. He didn't charge the men. He caught up to the girl and fell into step just behind her left heel, his eyes glued to her. A collective, quiet sigh of surprise came from the watching men. The walk to the pasture was long and quiet. The girl's heart was pounding in her ears. She found the heifer and her calf resting under a lone tree. They were calm animals. This was the moment. She looked down at the dog. He was looking up at her, waiting. He had no idea what to do. All his old instincts were to chase and snap. She pointed a finger, not at the cattle, but at the space between them and the open gate far across the pasture. She used the same soft, calm voice she used when she read her book. "Bring them back, buddy," she whispered. "Easy now." The dog's ears twitched. He looked at the cows, then back at her. The command wasn't a yell. It wasn't a sharp whistle. It was a request. He took a few tentative steps forward, then circled wide, giving the animals plenty of space. The heifer saw him and got to her feet, putting herself between the dog and her calf. This was the critical second. The old rogue would have dashed in, nipping at her heels, sending her running in blind panic. The men watching from the fence line held their breath. One of them muttered, "Here we go." But the dog didn't dash. He kept his circle wide and slow. He kept looking back at the girl. She gave him a tiny nod. He moved a little closer to the heifer's side, not her heels. He just stood there. He used his presence, not his teeth. The heifer, confused by this polite pressure, took a step toward the gate. The calf followed. The dog took another step, maintaining his calm, wide circle. He was guiding them, not chasing them. It was the most natural, gentle herding anyone on that fence line had ever seen from a young dog. It was in his blood, but it had been buried under fear. Now, with the girl's quiet trust, it was coming out. Step by careful step, the little trio heifer, calf, and a very focused blue dog moved across the pasture. The girl walked far off to the side, her part done. She had given the direction, and the dog was doing the rest, figuring it out with a new kind of confidence. When the cattle walked calmly through the gate into the smaller pen, the dog stopped. He didn't follow them in. He sat down right where he was, his tongue lolling out, and looked at the girl. His whole body was asking, asterisk, was that good? Did I do it right? Asterisk, for a moment, there was absolute silence on the ranch. The only sound was the heifer lowing softly to her calf. The men were stunned. They had expected chaos, a runaway calf, a snapped dog. They had not expected this quiet, perfect teamwork. The girl walked over to the dog and sank to her knees in the grass. She didn't hug him. That was too much, too soon. But she put her face close to his. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with pride. "Such a good boy." The dog leaned forward and licked her chin. Once, a quick, wet touch. His tail swished through the grass, sweeping a clean arc in the dust. Elias finally moved. He walked over slowly, his boots making soft thuds on the earth. He looked at the dog, now sitting calmly beside his niece, panting happily. He looked at the cattle, safe in the pen. He looked at the faces of the other ranchers, who were shaking their heads in pure wonder. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. All his certainties were gone. The bet, the fence mending, the pride it all seemed small and silly now. He had been so wrong. He knelt down, not to the girl's level, but to the dog's. He held out a big, calloused hand, palm up, and held it perfectly still. The dog looked at the hand. He sniffed it. He remembered the fear, the anger, the loneliness. Then he looked at the girl's shining, happy face. He turned back and nudged Elias's fingers with his cool, damp nose. It wasn't a lick. It wasn't a cuddle. It was a truce. An agreement. Elias's stern face did something strange. It softened. He reached out and gently scratched the dog behind one ear. "Well," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name, "I reckon I owe a lot of fence mending." The rest of that day passed in a kind of quiet, happy days. The news of what happened in the south pasture traveled from the ranch hands to the neighbors, and soon it felt like the whole valley knew the story. The bet was over, settled not with an argument, but with a single gentle act. The ranchers who had come to watch tipped their hats to the girl before they left, their smiles genuine and a little bit humbled. No one mentioned fence mending. Some things are more important than a wager. For the dog, everything was new. He was no longer Rogue. The name didn't fit anymore. The girl started calling him Buddy, and it stuck because that's exactly what he had become. That evening, for the first time, he didn't go back to the lonely kennel. Elias opened the door to the mudroom, a warm, sheltered space just off the kitchen with old boots and coats. He put down a thick, folded blanket in a corner. Buddy walked in slowly, sniffing every inch, then circled 3 times on the blanket and settled down with a deep, shuddering sigh. He was inside. He was home. The next morning, a new chapter began. Elias was heading out on his horse to check fences in the far north section. It was a long, boring ride for a little girl. But as he was saddling up, he felt a presence. His niece was there, and sitting alertly at her side was Buddy. The dog looked from the horse to the man, his head tilted. "You two want to come along?" Elias asked, trying to sound casual. The girl nodded eagerly. Elias didn't say another word. He simply bent down, linked his hands, and boosted her up into the saddle in front of him. Then he gave a low whistle. "Come on, then." Buddy didn't need to be told twice. As the horse walked out of the yard, the dog fell into a steady, ground-eating trot beside them. He wasn't chasing. He wasn't scouting for trouble. He was just accompanying. His job, the one he had chosen for himself, was crystal clear. Stay with her. A jackrabbit burst from a bush, zigzagging across the path. Buddy's herding instincts fired, and he took 2 quick steps after it before stopping himself. He looked back at the girl in the saddle as if checking in. She shook her head with a little smile. "Leave it, Buddy." He turned away from the rabbit and came back to his place beside the horse. Elias, feeling the small, confident shake of her head, smiled into the collar of his jacket. That became the new rhythm of the ranch. Where the girl went, Buddy was her shadow. If she sat under the oak tree to read, he lay across her feet. If she helped her aunt pick vegetables in the garden, he watched from the edge, keeping an eye out for stray chickens. He had a calm dignity about him now. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. The ranch hands, who had once given him a wide berth, now nodded respectfully when he passed. "Mornin', Buddy," they'd say, and his tail would give a dignified thump against the ground. One warm afternoon near the end of the summer, the girl had an idea. She found a long, smooth stick in the woodpile. She held it up for Buddy to see. His ears perked. She gave it a gentle toss, not far, just a few yards into the open grass. "Fetch." Buddy looked at the stick. He looked at her. He trotted over, not with a frantic run, but with a purposeful stride. He picked up the stick carefully in the middle, turned, and brought it back. He didn't drop it at her feet and jump back. He held it, offering one end to her, his body wiggling with a contained joy he was still learning to express. She took it, laughing. Good boy. They played like that for a long time, the simple, happy game of a child and her dog. Elias watched from the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. This was the dog he had given up on. This was the untamable Rogue. Now he was playing fetch with a stick, his coat glossy in the sun, his heart clearly mended. The lessons learned on the Gray Rock Ranch were soft but deep. Elias learned that some things aren't broken, they're just lost. and they need a quiet guide to find their way back, not a strong hand to force them. The girl learned that patience and kindness are a language even the most frightened heart can understand. And Buddy learned that the world wasn't all sharp edges and loud noises. It could also be soft blankets, gentle hands, and a small person whose love was as steady as the sunrise. The final proof of the change came on the girl's last evening. Her suitcase was packed by the door. A sadness hung in the air. Buddy felt it. He followed her from room to room, his nails clicking on the wooden floors. He didn't whine. He just made sure she was always in sight. As the sun set, painting the sky in oranges and purples, she went to her favorite spot under the big oak tree. Buddy followed and lay down, resting his head heavily on her lap. She stroked the smooth spot between his ears, her fingers tracing the patterns in his fur. "I have to go home tomorrow," she whispered to him. He looked up at her, his brown eyes deep and understanding. He licked her hand once, as if to say he knew. "But I'll be back," she promised. "You watch over things until I get back. You're a ranch dog now." And he was. He wasn't just tamed. He had found his place. He had a person to love and a home to protect. The ghost of Gray Rock was gone. In its place was a loyal friend, a steady guardian, and a living reminder that sometimes the smallest voice can teach the loudest heart-ho.